Hi, today what we're going to be looking at is how to prepare and paint new softwood timber. Now, some of you might have had an extension put on your house or some alteration works where they've fitted a lot of softwood like you've got around this architrave around here, which all needs painting up. So I'm going to be showing you how to prepare it for painting and the coatings of paint you're going to need to get a good long-lasting finish. So, if the camera would like to come over here, if you've had door frames fitted and skirting boards, you may notice you've got nails which are slightly proud of the surface. So obviously we can't paint over those. I mean, if we were using a water-based paint, wherever the nails are, you're going to get a brown rust spot. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to be using this called a nail punch, which you can either buy individually or in a set, and a hammer, just to punch these below the surface. So all you do is you put the nail punch against the nail and give it a few taps with a hammer just to knock it below the surface. So wherever you've got nails on your skirting boards or door frames, you just need to tap them below the surface before we put any paint on there at all. So now we've done that, let's go and have a look at the next thing we've got to do to our new softwood timber. Okay, so after you've used the nail punch and knock the nails below the surface, the next stage is to give the timber a light rub down to get rid of any burrs or fluffy bits of timber. So what I normally use is some 240 grade aluminium oxide paper, just to give it a light rub down. So rub in the direction of the grain, just give it a very light rub, just to get rid of any little burrs off in the timber and stuff like that. So you don't need to go crazy at this, it's just a light gentle rub over the new timber in the direction of the grain of the timber. Give it a light rub down. And when you've done that, just grab your dusting brush and give it a little dust off, like that. Yeah, that feels a lot better now. Okay, so that's ready for the next stage of the process. Right, so now the timber is all lightly rubbed down and very smooth. So the next stage of the process is to apply some of this patent knotting over the knots. You need to apply it over the knots to stop the resin bleeding through and staining your paintwork. If you've ever lived in a new house, you may have noticed after a few months you get these little orangey brown circles appearing on your door frames and skirting boards. That's where they probably haven't used the knotting to seal over the knots. Okay, so it comes in a bottle like this, and the problem is with applying this, if you use one of your own paint brushes, you'll need some methylated spirits to clean your brush out, which you might not have at home, but there is another way around it. Instead of using a brush, what you can do is just get a bit of rag, put some of the knotting on the rag and just dab it over the knots like that, which still does the same job, but it means you then don't have to go and wash your brushes out afterwards. I'm going to use now this special knotting bottle that some of us decorators have, and it's got a little brush attached to the end of it, so that I can go and coat the knots over like this. So yeah, so this is shellac knotting to seal the knots, to stop it bleeding through your paintwork. It dries pretty quickly, this stuff, probably in about 20 to 30 minutes. It's dry enough to put a coat of paint over it. So you just go across all along your new timber, and wherever there's a knot, just put a light coating of this knotting over the surface to stop the knots bleeding through. Okay, so that's all the knots treated. So in 15 or 20 minutes, hopefully I'll be able to do the next stage of the process. Okay, so the knotting seems dry enough now. It's about 20 or 30 minutes to dry off. So after the knotting's dry, the next thing we need to do to the new timber is to give it a coat of primer. Now this is the primer that most decorators use nowadays. It's an acrylic water-based wood primer, and you can also use it as an undercoat as well. So that's the one that I'm going to be using on this timber. And like I say, it's the most popular one that most people tend to use on new timber nowadays. Because it's water-based, it tends to dry very quickly, which is good. And you don't get any fumes with it, etc. So, what you'll notice with this primer is it's quite thin, because what it needs to do is to actually soak down into the timber and grip hold of it and seal the timber. So that's why we're applying the primer to the timber, to seal it and to get good adhesion with the wood underneath. So press it on, brush it out evenly on the surface. I'm pushing quite hard with the brush to try and force it down into the timber underneath. Nice and evenly. That's good. So I'll carry on priming up this piece of timber now, and I'll be back in a couple of minutes. Okay, so that's had a couple of hours to dry now. Yep, so that's nice and dry. So at this point, after you put the primer on, now would be the time to do any filling you need to do in any nail holes you've had or any little splits in the wood. So you knock up your powder-based filler, fill those in and give them a rub down, get it smooth before you move on to your next coat of paint. So you always need to prime before you use your filler. Now at this stage, you've got two choices on what paint system to put on top of your primer. You've got choice A, which is your traditional oil-based undercoat and gloss, and choice B is the more modern alternatives, which are your acrylic undercoat and glosses. So the traditional undercoat and gloss, good points about this is it's very hard wearing, very tough, and it gives a nice shine with the gloss that goes on the top, nice full gloss shine. The downside, as we know, is they take 16 hours to dry between coats of paint. They give off a lot of fumes. You've got to use white spirit to clean your brushes up with. And the most annoying thing of all, I think, is after you've painted them nice and white, within a year or two they tend to lose that brightness and to start to turn sort of a yellowy, light brown colour over time, particularly if they're not getting any daylight, like in cupboards and in dark rooms and corridors. So that's the oil-based. The water-based alternatives, the more modern ones, these dry in about 2 to 3 hours between coats, which means that you can go from a bare piece of timber to a finished article in one day, which is brilliant. They also don't give off those nasty fumes and solvents, so they're better for the environment. And the thing I like about them most of all is they do not fade or change colour. So if you've got something you paint it nice and bright white, it'll stay like that for many years. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to use another coat of the acrylic primer undercoat as my undercoat on the wood. So I'm going to get that sorted right now. So I'm back with the acrylic primer undercoat. So now I'll be using this particular paint as the undercoat to go on top of my primer. There we go. So you'll see that at the moment it doesn't look very white at all with just one coat of the primer on it. So now this should start to make it look a nice lot whiter now. So we put undercoat on surfaces for a couple of reasons, particularly on timber. It gives good adhesion for the gloss paint which is going to go on top of it, so the gloss has got something to grip onto with its little fingers, so it's not going to fall off. And also the undercoat acts a bit like a liquid filler. So if you've got any little small surface irregularities in the surface, little tiny splits and little dents, the undercoat will fill those in for you. So that's the main reason why we use undercoat, for adhesion for your gloss and to fill in those surface irregularities. Okay, so you can see it's looking a lot whiter now. So I'm going to crack on and zoom down and do the end of this piece of timber. I'll be back in a minute. Right, let's have a look. Yep, that undercoat's nice and dry. Only took a couple of hours for that acrylic undercoat to dry. So before I put the gloss paint on the top, I always give the surface a little denib with some of my 240 grade abrasive. So it's just a light rub over the surface to get rid of any little nibs in the paint. It does make a difference to the final gloss finish you'll get on the surface. So it's just a very light, gentle rub over the surface. Don't go too hard. Just a light rub like that, just to get any nibs off. So it only takes a couple of minutes just to quickly rub it over. Then once again, give it a bit of a dust off to get all the dust off. Now, for the last coat, I'm going to give it a coat of this acrylic gloss. And most of these water-based glosses say that on the tin, quick drying. So if you've got a can of gloss and it says quick drying, you can virtually be sure it's acrylic water-based paint. So, here we go. Work the brush into the paint a bit. There we go. With these acrylic glosses, you don't brush them out as far as you would the oil-based glosses. So you only do a small piece at a time, and then give it a nice gentle lay off just with the tips of the brush. You can see how nice and white and shiny that is looking. Like that. And when you've done a certain amount, do longer strokes on the brush just to even out the surface, like that. So I'm going to carry on to the end and we'll come back and have a look at it when it's all done. Okay, so that's all done now. So let's just recap on what we did to this new bit of softwood timber. So first of all, we give it a light rub down. Then we put the shellac knotting over the knots to stop them bleeding through and marking our paintwork. Then we gave it a coat of primer to seal the timber. Then we gave it a coat of undercoat on top of that so that it gives good adhesion for the gloss going on top. Then finally we give it a coat of gloss to protect the surface and to make it look really nice as well. So the benefit of using the water-based paints today was I was able to do all that in less than a day, to go from bare timber to a gloss finish in less than a day. So anyway, I hope you found that useful. And if you have, why don't you subscribe to my channel so that you can keep up to date with all my latest videos.